I used to believe that people get fired because they mess up. Come in late, miss deadlines, break rules. Something clear, something you can point at. I don't believe that anymore. Not after what happened on that Friday. The day started like any other. I was in before most people, the way I'd been for 8 years. I wasn't the loud, charismatic guy who told stories in the break room. I wasn't the future executive people talked about in talent reviews. I was the person who handled the infrastructure nobody understood until it broke. The continuity models, the compliance checks, the pre-deal audits that determine whether the company is about to lose millions. Quiet work, important work, the type leadership notices only when something goes wrong. That week, nothing had gone wrong. Actually, everything was going too smoothly. We were closing in on the biggest deal of the quarter, a $9.8 million partnership with a mid-sized client looking to expand internationally. The CEO, Melissa Drake, had been parading the upcoming signing as proof of her visionary leadership. She needed that win. The board had been restless for months. I wasn't directly part of the negotiations, but I'd been assigned to run internal compliance checks. Not glamorous, not public-facing, but I'd seen enough deals collapse because someone forgot one line item. My job was to prevent those headlines. By noon, I'd already flagged 3 inconsistencies in the preliminary documents. Nothing fatal, but things that needed attention. I messaged my manager, then the legal team, then finance. Standard protocol. Nobody responded. Everyone was too busy polishing slide decks for a win they assumed was already guaranteed. Around 2 p.m., Melissa walked through our floor. She didn't visit often. When she did, people sat straighter. Screens changed. Voices softened. She wore that tense smile, the one that meant she expected applause. I kept my head down and continued reviewing the vendor's historical liabilities. That's when I noticed something odd. A section of their reporting that didn't match their declarations from earlier years. Not fraud, not a crisis, but a discrepancy big enough to trigger a mandatory risk disclosure. I marked it, saved it, and added it to the internal review packet I planned to send by end of day. Nothing dramatic, just my job. At 4:09 p.m., my computer logged me out. Not crashed, logged out. When I tried to sign back in, it said, "Access disabled. Contact your administrator." I froze. That message isn't for system maintenance. It's the one IT uses when someone is being offboarded. I checked my phone. No notifications from my manager. No warnings. No issues. Instead, I saw a calendar invite that had arrived 12 minutes earlier. Exit meeting, HR. I remember just staring at it. My mind wasn't racing, it was blank. I'd seen colleagues go through surprise offboardings, usually after a scandal or a restructuring, but I had no warnings, no write-ups, no conflicts. Nothing. When I stepped into the HR room, Melissa was already there. Not my manager, not legal, not finance. Melissa herself. She didn't greet me, didn't offer a seat. She looked at me as if she had already moved past this moment. "Your position is being eliminated," she said, her tone crisp, rehearsed. "Effective immediately." I asked why, calmly, professionally. I needed to hear the logic, even if it was thin. She didn't give any. "We're restructuring," she said. "This decision is final." HR slid the papers toward me. Severance, standard NDA, equipment return. The usual corporate exit ritual. But one detail caught my eye. The NDA had a clause referencing all materials related to Deal Artemis. That was the internal name for the 9.8 million partnership. Why would an NDA for a mid-level employee reference that deal specifically? The only reason to attach that clause to someone like me is if leadership believed I had something that could affect it. Something they didn't want leaving the building. But I hadn't leaked anything. I hadn't spoken to the client. I hadn't shared a single document externally. All I had done was flag inconsistencies internally. Privately. Which meant one thing. Someone wanted those inconsistencies buried before Monday's signing. I didn't argue. I didn't make speeches. Melissa liked public defiance. It made her look powerful. I wasn't giving her that moment. I read the papers, asked 2 clarifying questions, signed, and placed the pen down exactly in the center of the table. She gave me that smile, the one people wear when they think they've outplayed you. Security walked me back to my desk. I was allowed to take personal items only. Not a single file. Not a single note. They even checked the box. What they didn't check, because HR had forgotten to revoke it, was a private personal folder tied to my user profile. A folder I created years ago as a scratchpad for compliance reviews. A folder that technically belonged to me because it sat outside the shared directories. Inside that folder was the preliminary discrepancy file I'd saved only 30 minutes before I was locked out. And because the folder was still synced to my personal drive, a legacy setting IT, never turned off, the file was now in my possession, fully legally. I didn't steal anything. I didn't breach anything. I didn't access anything after being locked out. I simply had a copy of my own work. Work Melissa clearly didn't want anyone to look too closely at. I walked out of the building carrying a cardboard box with a family photo, a coffee mug, and exactly one thing that mattered: the truth. I didn't know yet, not truly, how much damage that buried discrepancy could cause, or why Melissa was so desperate to silence it, or how a single overlooked file in a forgotten folder would tear through her $9.8 million deal like a fault line. But standing on the sidewalk that Friday afternoon, watching the office lights blur against the glass, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not anger, not fear, clarity. And clarity is the one thing people like Melissa can't control. I spent the weekend replaying Friday in my head, not out of panic, but out of a growing sense that something didn't add up. I'd been in enough corporate storms to recognize when an organization was hiding a mistake, and when someone was trying to bury the person who found it. By Saturday morning, the anger had settled in. Clean, quiet anger. The kind that comes when you realize someone rewrote the truth to save themselves. I kept asking myself one question: why the rush to fire me? If I had genuinely done something wrong, they would have documented it. If my position was being eliminated, they would have started with contractors or non-essential roles. If performance was the issue, I would have seen the signs weeks earlier. Instead, Melissa personally oversaw a same-day termination of someone who had just delivered the compliance packet she needed for Monday's deal. It didn't make sense, unless the packet contained something she didn't want included. I opened my laptop and went through the discrepancy file again. Slowly, line by line. It wasn't a smoking gun. It was more like a crack in the foundation. The vendor's liabilities didn't match their declared exposure on international operations. The difference wasn't catastrophic on its own, but under our policies, it required a mandatory follow-up audit. Mandatory. Meaning the deal couldn't legally close until the audit was resolved, which meant Melissa knew she couldn't sign Monday if anyone looked at my findings. I sat back in my chair. That was the motive. Clear as daylight. The question was, did she fire me because she thought I was a threat? Or because she wanted the file gone and assumed offboarding would wipe my access before anyone noticed? Either way, she miscalculated badly. By Sunday evening, irritation had turned into something steadier, a sense of responsibility. The compliance report wasn't optional. If the deal closed with known inconsistencies, it wasn't just a corporate embarrassment. It was a violation that could cost the company fines and, depending on severity, open someone up to legal exposure. Someone like Melissa. People like her don't fear mistakes. They fear documentation. What I still didn't understand was why she was willing to risk a multi-million-dollar deal for the sake of speed. CEOs don't do that unless something or someone is pressuring them. Investors? The board? A bonus tied to quarterly milestones? Whatever it was, the clock mattered more than the truth, and that made my existence inconvenient. Monday morning would be interesting, but I wasn't planning revenge. Not yet. I'm not the kind of man who destroys a career over office politics. I'm not vindictive by nature. What I am is methodical, And I wasn't going to let my work be twisted into a liability just because a CEO wanted to play hero for a board meeting. Around 9:30 that evening, my phone buzzed, an unknown number. I let it ring out. Then it buzzed again. And again. 3 calls. No voicemail. Then a text. "Hey, it's Daniel. Can we talk?" Daniel was a senior analyst on the finance team. Smart, cautious, one of the very few people who treated compliance like a partnership instead of a nuisance. We weren't close, but we had mutual respect. I hesitated before responding. "What's going on?" His reply came fast. "Something's off. Can you pick up?" I called him back. His voice was low, but not panicked. More like someone who'd spent the day noticing things nobody else did. "Did you know your access was disabled 15 minutes before the exit meeting invite was sent?" he asked. I stopped walking. "No. How do you know that?" "I saw the log. It was weird. Usually IT disables access after HR confirms termination. This time it was in reverse." "Reverse?" Meaning Melissa instructed IT first, then created a justification after. "What else did you see?" I asked. Daniel exhaled, long, controlled, the way people do when they're about to cross an invisible line. "Legal never received your compliance summary," he said. "The folder was empty, completely wiped." "That's impossible." "I uploaded it at 11:47 a.m. I checked the server logs. It was deleted at 12:02. 12 minutes after Melissa walked past my desk. Not a coincidence. Daniel wasn't guessing. He had access to the back-end systems for financial audits, which gave him visibility over document histories. If he said something was deleted, it was deleted. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because," he said quietly, "if something goes wrong on Monday, they're not going to blame the CEO. They're going to blame the person who isn't here anymore." He was right. I could see the narrative already. Former employee failed to prepare due diligence. Former employee overlooked discrepancies. Former employee caused damage. Dead man's switch logic. Easy, clean, convenient. "Do you still have your copy?" Daniel asked. For a moment, I considered lying. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I didn't trust that his phone wasn't monitored. But Daniel was sharp. He wouldn't ask if he didn't already suspect. "Yes," I said. He didn't gasp or act surprised. Instead, he spoke slowly, choosing each word with surgical precision. "Good. You may need it." "Need it?" I felt the irritation return, sharper this time. "Daniel, what exactly is happening tomorrow?" He hesitated before answering. "Melissa pushed the signing up by an hour. She wants everything wrapped before the board call. She told legal the compliance review had already been cleared." That was a lie. "And?" I asked. "And the client is bringing an external consultant to verify our internal checks. He asked specifically for the discrepancy report." My chest tightened. Of course. Consultants don't rely on trust. They verify. They cross-check. They ask questions that make CEOs nervous. "Melissa thinks the consultant won't dig too deep," Daniel said. "She thinks everyone's too busy to question a missing file." "And if the consultant insists," he paused, "then someone's going to have to explain why the only person who flagged the issue was terminated 2 business hours before the meeting." There it was, the real threat. If the client discovered the buried discrepancy on their own, they wouldn't just walk away. They'd report it, and companies don't survive accusations of hiding risk exposure in multi-million-dollar deals. Melissa wasn't trying to bury a mistake. She was trying to bury me, the record of the mistake. By the time I ended the call, the irritation had evolved into something cold and focused. Not revenge, not yet, but the understanding that tomorrow would not unfold the way Melissa expected. She wanted me gone, invisible, erased. She was about to learn that removing someone from the building doesn't erase the truth they carry. Sleep didn't come that night, not because I was scared, but because everything finally aligned in a way I could no longer ignore. When I closed my eyes, I kept seeing the erased compliance folder, the reversed offboarding sequence, the NDA clause referencing Deal Artemis. one decision after another, pointing to a truth I hadn't wanted to admit. Melissa didn't fire me to silence a mistake. She fired me because she believed I wouldn't fight back. That realization was quieter than anger, heavier than fear. It sat in my chest like a weight, pressing down until the picture became painfully clear. I had underestimated her. For years, I had convinced myself she was just another CEO obsessed with optics. Someone who polished numbers, spun narratives, and cut corners for the sake of quarterly goals. But firing me, erasing the file, lying to legal, rescheduling the signing, that wasn't incompetence. That was intent. Someone like her doesn't risk a $9.8 million deal because of oversight. She does it because the alternative threatens her personally. And if that was true, then the discrepancy in my file wasn't the real problem. It was what that discrepancy implied. A larger liability. One buried under dozens of glowing presentations and inflated forecasts. The kind of liability that can end careers. I sat at my kitchen table, the glow of my laptop illuminating the half-empty coffee mug beside it, and made myself face something I had been avoiding for years. I had spent too much of my professional life protecting people who never would have protected me. For the first time, I let myself revisit moments I'd dismissed as office politics. The meetings where Melissa talked over me. The presentations where my work was credited to someone louder. The late nights I stayed to clean up the risk logs that leadership ignored. The way she laughed, genuinely laughed, when someone in the room called me the quiet compliance guy who always looks tired. I had worn patience like armor. I had told myself that my job mattered more than credit, more than recognition. I believed that if the work was solid, people would see. That integrity was enough. But integrity doesn't protect you from someone who profits off your silence. Around 3:40 a.m., something shifted. Not a dramatic epiphany, not a movie moment, just a subtle click in the mind, a sense of finally stepping out of a fog I hadn't known I was in. I realized that for years, I'd been the one holding the weight of the system together. Not Melissa, not her speeches, not the branding campaigns she poured money into. It was people like me who kept the company from collapsing under its own ambition, and she had thrown me aside like a replaceable part. That clarity hurt more than the firing itself. By dawn, the decision had formed, not out of revenge, but out of necessity. If I didn't act, Melissa's lie would become the official story. I would be blamed for the discrepancy. The company would sign the deal. The consultant would find what Melissa erased, and the fallout would land on the person who wasn't there to defend himself. Me. I wasn't going to let her rewrite my life to cover her tracks. At 7:52 a.m., my phone buzzed again. Daniel. Consultant's already here, his message read. He's asking for the compliance packet. Legal says they don't have it. No surprise. What did Melissa say? I texted back. She told him it was completed and cleared. He asked to see it. She said it's stored on a restricted drive and IT is retrieving it. A lie on top of a lie. I got dressed, grabbed my laptop, and stepped outside. The December air was sharp enough to sting. 12 hours earlier, I'd thought the worst part of this story was the firing itself. I was wrong. The worst part was how predictable it had all become. As I walked, Daniel called again. This time his voice was tight, not scared, but aware that a fuse had been lit. He's not buying it, Daniel said. The consultant. He's going through prior audits. He asked specifically why the last 3 had gaps. Gaps, not mistakes. Gaps. Intentional omissions. The kind that could only come from leadership forcing teams to fast-track due diligence. And then? I asked. He wants timestamps, Daniel said. Server logs, audit history, everything. Of course he did. A competent consultant doesn't chase the narrative. He chases the evidence. And Melissa? I asked, and Daniel's answer was soft but clear. She's getting defensive. Good. Defensive CEOs make mistakes. As I walked past the cafe near my building, I saw a group of office workers laughing over their morning coffees, unaware that only a few blocks away, a multi-million-dollar deal was about to meet the one thing corporate spin can't fight: the truth. I wasn't planning to go to the office. Showing up uninvited after being terminated would look unprofessional, maybe even confrontational. That played into Melissa's narrative, not mine. But I didn't need to be there physically. My work spoke for itself. I opened my laptop on a park bench and pulled up the discrepancy file. Every line, every figure, every reference was sourced, cross-checked, and documented. Under our policy, it was ironclad. I typed a short email. No drama, no accusations, no emotion. To whom it may concern, attached is my compliance summary for Deal Artemis, prepared on December 15th at 11:47 a.m. This document is part of the standard due diligence process required by Corporate Policy 4.7.1. I am providing it in response to an external audit request to ensure accuracy and prevent any misrepresentation of my work. No commentary, no speech, just the truth. Then I CC'd legal and the external consultant and the internal audit distribution list. And because documentation protects everyone, I copied the shared compliance mailbox, the one monitored by automated retention logs. Then I hit send. I expected my heart to race, but it didn't. All I felt was a quiet steadiness. I wasn't sabotaging anything. I wasn't attacking anyone. I was simply providing the work I had completed before being terminated. If Melissa wanted to frame me as incompetent or negligent, she no longer had the room to do it. 5 minutes later, Daniel messaged me. "She looks pale." I closed my laptop. That was when the final realization hit me. One deeper than anger, deeper than betrayal. I hadn't been the weak one in that building. I had been the only one holding it together, and Melissa had just pulled out the wrong piece. When I closed my laptop that morning, I thought the email would simply force transparency. I wasn't expecting chaos. I wasn't expecting the ripple effect. I wasn't expecting Melissa, the woman who built a reputation on being unshakable, to unravel faster than anyone imagined. But that's the thing about truth. It doesn't explode. It spreads. The first sign of fallout came at 9:14 a.m. Daniel called again, this time without preamble. "You need to hear this," he whispered. I could hear movement behind him. Papers shuffling, chairs scraping, the muted tension of a room full of people, trying not to say the wrong thing. "What's happening?" I asked. "She brought in IT," he said. "She's trying to spin the missing compliance packet as a technical glitch." A glitch, of course. Deleting the file and firing the person who wrote it? That wasn't a glitch. That was motive with a timestamp. "What did the consultant say?" I asked. Daniel gave a short, almost humorless breath. He asked why the glitch only affected one specific folder, during one specific 12-minute window, right after you uploaded the report. I couldn't help it. I smiled. Not out of spite, but at the sheer predictability of it. Melissa was a strategist when the field was hers, but under pressure, she defaulted to amateur's moves. "And legal?" I asked. "Legal is uncomfortable," Daniel said. "They didn't know about the deletion. They didn't know you'd been terminated. They didn't know the policy required the discrepancy to be escalated." I heard voices again, murmurs rising, tones sharpening. "Daniel," I said, "are you in the room?" "No," he whispered. "I'm outside, but they left the door cracked. Everyone's watching." Of course they were. People sense when power shifts, even if they don't understand the details. "What's Melissa doing now?" I asked. "She's insisting your report was incomplete," he said. "She's saying the discrepancy was minor and you overreacted." Anyone who's ever worked with risk knows what that meant. She was trying to paint me as incompetent, the classic corporate shield. "But then," Daniel continued, "the consultant asked the question nobody expected." He paused. He asked why you had been terminated 2 hours after uploading the report, if it was as minor as she claimed. Silence stretched between us. I pictured the room, Melissa stiffening, legal glancing at each other, the consultant tilting his head slightly, sensing blood in the water. What was her answer? I asked quietly. She didn't have one, he said. She tried to pivot. He didn't let her. Of course he didn't. Consultants who deal with risk don't chase narratives. They chase incentives. If incentive and decision don't align, something's wrong. She's trying to blame the holiday rush, Daniel added, but no one is buying it. As he spoke, I wasn't thinking about revenge or vindication. I was thinking about pressure, how Melissa had spent years projecting control, authority, absolute certainty, only to discover she'd built her empire on corners. Nobody tracked until someone quiet, someone meticulous, someone like me, touched the wrong one. But the real storm hadn't arrived yet. At 9:31 a.m., my inbox pinged. An email from legal. Short, polite, very formal. Could you please confirm the timeline of your compliance review for Deal Artemis? Additionally, we request clarification regarding the versioning logs attached to your report. They wanted documentation. They wanted timestamps. They wanted cover. I sent everything. The preliminary notes, the uploaded version, the server confirmation email from 11:47 a.m., the saved discrepancy screenshot, the policy reference. All factual, all neutral, all irrefutable. 10 minutes later, Daniel called again. You're not going to believe this. What now? She raised her voice. Melissa never raised her voice. She'd built her brand on measured calm. For her to break that facade meant the walls were genuinely closing in. What did she say? I asked. She accused the consultant of overstepping, he whispered. Said he was interfering with internal personnel matters. Internal personnel matters, meaning me. And the consultant? I asked. A quiet laugh, the first time I'd heard Daniel laugh since the day this began. He told her, I'm not here to review your personnel. I'm here to ensure you didn't misrepresent risk to my client. There it was, the line that shifts the balance. Corporate politics can bury almost anything. But once misrepresentation enters the room, everything becomes evidence. I heard footsteps near Daniel. He lowered his voice. She's losing control of the narrative, he said. IT just handed over server logs. They confirmed someone deleted your report from the shared drive. And, I asked, and the timestamp shows it was deleted under her admin permissions. I blinked. Slowly. Even I hadn't expected that. She deleted it herself? I asked. Or she logged in under her profile, Daniel said. Either way, the logs don't lie. I leaned back on the bench, the cold metal pressing against my shoulders. People walked past me, parents with strollers, runners, commuters rushing toward their offices. None of them knew a corporate meltdown was unfolding 4 blocks away because someone underestimated the wrong employee. What's happening now? I asked. Daniel took a breath. She dismissed the room. That was the move of someone who felt the ground shifting. But the consultant didn't leave, he added. I could imagine the scene. Melissa standing at the head of the table, smile brittle, insisting everything was fine, while the one person she couldn't manipulate was calmly requesting access to the version, history, system logs, and audit trail. And the board? I asked. They've been notified, Daniel said. The consultant escalated. In corporate language, escalated is a detonator. It means someone with power is about to ask why millions of dollars are at risk because a CEO interfered with a mandatory compliance review. Daniel, I said, you should step back from this. I don't want you pulled into something that... He cut me off. It's too late for that, he whispered. Everyone knows I'm the one who found the logs. A pause. But listen, you need to know something else. His tone shifted. Not fear, not panic, something heavier. She said your name. My chest tightened. In what context? She claimed you were disgruntled and unreliable. She said you'd been underperforming. I closed my eyes. There it was, the final card. The one people like her always keep ready. Character assassination. Proof didn't matter. Documentation didn't matter. 8 years of spotless work didn't matter. What mattered was the story she could spin. She's trying to frame the discrepancy as something you misunderstood, Daniel said. She's trying to paint you as incompetent. I let the silence sit. Daniel, I said finally, that means she's scared. He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was steady. She's terrified. I checked the time. 10:12 a.m. If the consultant had escalated, if legal had the documentation, if the board had been notified, and if Melissa was resorting to character attacks, then we were past the point of no return. The deal wasn't just at risk. It was already collapsing, and Melissa knew it. I stood from the bench, slipped my laptop into my bag, and took a slow breath of cold morning air. I hadn't sought revenge. I hadn't plotted anything. All I'd done was refuse to disappear. And now the truth, the quiet, documented truth, was doing what truth always does when someone spends too long running from it. It was catching up. I didn't head toward the office that morning. I didn't need to. Everything that mattered was already in motion. When a structure starts to collapse, it doesn't matter whether you're standing in the lobby or watching from across the street. Gravity finishes the job either way. At 10:27 a.m., my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Daniel. It was legal. "Are you available for a brief call?" I stepped into a quieter side street and answered. The voice on the other end belonged to Robert Hayes, one of the senior counsels. Level-headed, careful, the kind of man who didn't speak unless every word had already been weighed. "Thank you for sending the documentation," he said. "It was, timely." Timely. Corporate for necessary to prevent a disaster. He continued. "We've reviewed the discrepancy summary. It appears your report should have been escalated under policy 4.7.1. "I know," I said calmly. "And the deletion," he added, "was not authorized through legal." "I figured." There was a short pause, and when he spoke again, the tone had shifted. Not warmer, not emotional, but respectful. "You did the right thing by retaining your copy." He didn't say more. He didn't need to. In corporate language, that was as close to an apology as a lawyer could go without admitting liability. "We may reach out again," he added, "depending on how things proceed." I understood what that meant. They weren't protecting me. They were protecting the company. But today, that distinction worked in my favor. I ended the call and walked toward a small cafe across from a bookstore. I ordered a black coffee, found a seat near the window, and watched people rush to work with their laptops, their badges, their stress. For the first time since Friday, I felt something close to stillness. Then my phone lit up again. "Daniel." She locked herself in the executive room. I blinked. "Melissa?" "Yes." The consultant requested a private meeting with the board. She tried to get ahead of it, but they asked her to step out. That was significant. Boards don't sideline CEOs unless they believe the CEO's the risk. "What else?" I asked. Daniel inhaled sharply. "They saw the deletion logs." I closed my eyes for a moment, not because I felt triumphant, but because I knew exactly how that scene played out. A room full of seasoned executives reading an audit trail showing a mandatory compliance file was uploaded, then deleted minutes later, under the CEO's credentials, immediately followed by the termination of the person who wrote it. No spin survives that sequence. The next message came only 10 minutes later. Board called an emergency internal session. Then consultant refused to sign off on the deal. Then the client wants to postpone the partnership pending further review. And finally, she's out. Those two words arrived at 11:03 a.m. I stared at them longer than I expected. Not because I doubted the outcome, because it happened faster than revenge stories usually do in real life. "What do you mean, out?" I asked. "She's been relieved of operational duties pending investigation," Daniel whispered. "They escorted her out of the conference wing." Not fired. Not yet. Corporate wheels turn slowly when a CEO is involved. They require documentation, hearings, quiet signatures behind closed doors. But removing her from operational control? That meant the board already concluded she was a liability, a $9.8 million liability. I sipped my coffee, letting the warmth settle through me. I didn't smile. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt rested, like someone finally put down a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for years. Another message from Daniel. You should know. She tried to blame you again on her way out. Of course she did. People like Melissa don't fall. They look for someone to drag down with them. What happened? I asked. Legal corrected her, Daniel replied. They showed the board your full documentation chain. Every file. Every timestamp. Every policy requirement. A pause. They said you acted exactly as your position required. Exactly. As required. For 8 years I'd worked quietly, consistently, accurately. I never expected praise. I certainly never expected vindication. Yet there it was. Not from colleagues, not from executives trying to score points, but from the one department that deals only in facts. At 11:40 a.m., Robert Hayes called again. Just wanted to update you, he said. In light of your documentation, the narrative around the compliance delay has been corrected. Corrected. Meaning they could no longer blame me. Then he said something I didn't expect. The board will want to speak with you this week, not for disciplinary action. I waited. Employment status review, he clarified. I almost laughed. Not out of amusement, but out of disbelief. You want me back? We want to understand the circumstances of your termination, he said carefully, and whether it aligns with policy. It didn't. Everyone knew it didn't, but I didn't answer right away. I looked out the cafe window. Cars rolled by. People hurried across crosswalks. A couple argued over a shared umbrella. Life happened, indifferent to corporate collapse, indifferent to power shifts, indifferent to the quiet decisions that change everything. Send me the details, I finally said. We will. The call ended. I set my phone down and just breathed. For the first time in years, the air felt like mine. I wasn't the hero of this story. I wasn't the villain either. I was simply the person who refused to disappear when someone powerful needed a scapegoat. Melissa fired me on a Friday without a word of explanation. On Monday, her $9.8 million deal collapsed because of one file she tried to erase. But the truth doesn't vanish when you delete it. It waits, it settles, it remembers. And when the moment comes, it stands exactly where you left it. Patient, documented, undeniable. I finished my coffee, stepped outside, and let the cold winter air hit my face. For the first time since the firing, I wasn't thinking about Melissa. I was thinking about tomorrow, about interviews I hadn't taken because I was too loyal, about opportunities I'd ignored because I believed hard work was enough, about a version of myself who had stayed quiet far too long. I wasn't going back to that building, not for a meeting, not for an apology, not for a reinstated badge. I had already walked out once. This time, I was leaving on my own terms. I pulled out my phone, opened a job offer email I'd bookmarked months ago, and finally hit reply. And as I walked down the street, away from the mess Melissa created and the truth she tried to bury, I realized something simple. Peace doesn't come when justice arrives. Peace comes when you finally stop carrying what was never yours to hold.